Hello and welcome everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you and explain to you the different types and modifications of basic Sun Salutations, or how they are being referred to in Sanskrit, Surya Namaskaras, in the style of Vinyasa yoga. Now, before getting more into the details, there are a few things I would like to clarify. First of all, I'm doing this tutorial in the style of Vinyasa yoga, and I'm not going to talk about Sun Salutations in other types or schools of yoga such as Ashtanga, Shivananda, Hatha, or any other. And there's only one single reason for this. Throughout the years, I have been practicing most of the times in the style of Vinyasa, so I'm more experienced in this style. So, by any means, I do not mean, or I do not want to say that Sun Salutations of Vinyasa yoga are superior than any other style of yoga. No, in my view, none of the yoga styles are superior to one another. Now, the second thing is, even within the Vinyasa yoga style, I'm not saying that this is the only correct way, or these are the only ways to complete the Sun Salutations. During the years, I have been learning from many various teachers and also added some personal flavor to my practice. So again, I don't want to say by any means that this is a correct way to perform Sun Salutations. Now, the third thing is that I'm going to demonstrate how to execute the different variations and modifications, but I'm not going to talk about the roots, the origins, the history, or the philosophical part of Sun Salutations. So, within this video, we are going to go through of 3 different types of Sun Salutations: Type A, Type B, and Type C. Majority of the times we will be touching upon Type A. It's purely because Type B and Type C are simply derived from the Type A. So what is a Sun Salutation? Sun Salutation is a sequence of postures or asanas performed in a specific way, and the transition between these asanas. Even though Sun Salutations can be used for warm-up exercise or just as a really great exercise by themselves, at least I highly recommend you to warm up your wrists before getting into the practice. And that's what we are going to do right now. So there's a simple drill you can go through to just warm up your wrist. You are on all fours, open your fingers, and then you start leaning forward, then leaning backwards. Each and every time you try to lean forward a bit more, just to pressurize your wrists a bit more, and then go back, going front and going back, front and back. One more time, front and back. Now let's move to the right and to the left. In the meantime, also pressurize your fingers. All right, let's rotate the wrists backwards, and now we pull back with our hips. So let's stretch the wrists backwards. Let's just come back. Now we put down the wrists like this, and again we just lean forward and backward. If it puts too much pressure on your wrists, it's actually better to either reduce the distance between the fingers until they are interlaced, or you can also reduce the distance between your hands and your knees. After this, let's just come back to all fours, and now we are only reaching up the palms while keeping the fingers on the ground. Let's do a few rounds of this. And then let's also just do a few rounds of rotation. One way and then to another way. Very good. Then to continue. So the type A is a sequence of 10 postures, transitioning from standing to downward facing dog and then transitioning back to standing. Before just getting into the details of each and every postures and the transition, let's just go through which are these 10 postures. The starting pose is mountain pose, Tadasana. And we continue in upward mountain pose, Urdhva Tadasana. Fold forward to intense stretch pose, Uttanasana. Continue upward, intense stretch pose, Urdhva Uttanasana. Continue with four limbs, stick pose, Chaturanga Dandasana. Upward facing dog pose, Urdhva Mukha Svanasana. Downward facing dog pose, Adho Mukha Svanasana. And from here we transition back to upward intense stretch pose, Urdhva Uttanasana, to intense stretch pose, Uttanasana. Upward mountain pose, Urdhva Tadasana, and back to mountain pose, Tadasana. Here we not only execute these postures with our body, we also try to synchronize our breathing with our practice. Whenever we are transitioning from one pose to another, we are breathing in or we are breathing out. Whenever we in that posture, we actually stop our breathing process. One exception is the downward facing dog pose. But for the rest of the poses, we basically, for that very brief moment, while we at that particular posture, our lungs are either full of air or empty of air. So now let's go through of how we can transition from one posture to another. Starting with the mountain pose. Here we already activate our body, make sure that everything is tightened up, although there's no need to really squeeze our body. Just make sure that you keep your body active, your legs, your glutes, abdomens, your chest is high, arms are straight, and fingers are also well separated, and they're also under tension. Keep your chin parallel to the ground. That's our mountain pose. That's where we start and that's where we end at the end of the sequence. From here to transition to upward mountain pose, basically with an inhalation, we raise our hands, put them together, and look upwards in between the hands. From here we go down to Uttanasana with a forward fold. You can bring down your hands in front of you, next to you. It's really up to you, your personal preference, how you prefer to do it. The only thing what you need to make sure while getting down is that you keep and maintain your back straight. So try to avoid coming down like this with a rounded back. It's much better, in case you cannot really get down deep into the pose, is to bend your knees and try to connect, or at least close the gap between your thighs and your abdomens. If you can get down on your floor with your hands, really good. If not, no problem at all. Just keep your hands on your shin bone. Now we are in Uttanasana, the intense stretch pose. From here to transit to the next pose, which is the upward version of it, we want to make sure that we look forward here and we elongate our spine. If you can keep your hands on the floor, even better, but again, it's not mandatory. From here comes the point where you have actually a few options how to transit from this posture down to Chaturanga Dandasana, or you can actually transit down, even down on the floor, if you prefer to do it like that, or in case the Chaturanga Dandasana feels a bit too much for today. So the two preferred way to go from here is basically first you put down your hands. You can also bend your legs, then put one leg back and another leg. You are in plank pose here, and then you slowly come down halfway, or you come down completely. The major difference is, as you can see, that in case you're here, then your toes are being bent. Otherwise, your toes should be pointing backwards. Now, to get down to this pose, you can also just simply jump. So once you are here, you put your hands down on the floor, and then you jump directly into the posture. In my personal practice, I actually prefer to do a few rounds without the jumping. Then once I feel that I'm ready or my wrists are more warmed up, I normally transit back with a jump. So from here, you can either jump or you can put one leg and another leg and then come down. Now from Chaturanga, the next pose is the upward facing dog. You roll forward on your toes, bring your chest to the front, lift your head up, make sure that you roll backwards your shoulders and you look upwards. It comes with an inhalation. There's not any other way to transit from here to here. So it's good. We can't put any more modifications here. The only other modifications, in case you were down on the floor, then instead of upward facing dog pose, we will be going up only to cobra. In cobra, there is no need to completely block our hands. The only thing what we would need to do here is we press our hips and our feet on the ground, and we lift our chest with the help of our back muscles. We only use our hands just to balance a bit, but the majority of the work is done by our back muscles. Here it's important that the elbows are in and shoulders are rolled away as well. So either we are in the cobra pose or we are in upward facing dog pose. The next position is downward facing dog. So we lift our hips up. You can actually modify the distance if you want between the hands and the palms, and then we land in our downward facing dog pose. Same goes from cobra. If you're down here, first you come down, then turn your toes, and then you lift yourself up to downward facing dog. And if you want, you can actually modify the distance between your hands and the legs. Now in downward facing dog, just a very few key points. The key for the downward facing dog is to keep your hips high, and with the help of your hands, push your hips backward. It's really bad to keep your downward facing dog like here, or I don't know. If you really work hard to bring down your soles, but you're sacrificing the length of your spine, you're doing it wrong. So pay attention that the most important part is keep your hips high and push them backwards. Then from here, it's just rather secondary things that you start stretching your legs until finally you will reach the floor with your whole soles. Then normally we spend 5 breaths in the downward facing dog pose. Once we complete our 5th breath, with the next inhalation, we go back to again the lifted intense stretch pose. We can either do this transition with a big step with one leg followed by the other leg, and then we add the next position. Now if this is too much, or you simply prefer to do it another way, you have another few options here. One of the options can be is that you lift your heels and then you simply jump between the palms, then lift your chest up. And then a third option can be also, especially in case you lack a bit of hip mobility, that you do, instead of one big step, you do two steps. You take one step with one leg, then you go through with the other leg, and then another step. At the end, you should get back to the Urdhva Uttanasana posture with an inhalation. Then the next pose from here is simply you try to again close the gap between the thighs and the abdomens, and you fold forward with a straight back. With the next inhalation, we want to raise our chest up and stand up. Now here, the most important thing to pay attention to is that you keep your back straight while coming up. If you do the come up with your hands being kept at the front, more or less in line with your body, it's a bit more challenging to come up, but it's worth practicing this version as well. Here, try to avoid when you are simply just rounding your back and come up. This is not part of the Sun Salutations. So from here, you want to raise your chest and raise your arms, put them together, and then with an exhalation we come down. So that's how we transit through these 10 postures. Now, about the breathing part. As a rule of thumb, you can always just rely on the fact that whenever we lift our chest or we look upward, we breathe in. Whenever we go down with our heads or our chests, we exhale. So let's do one round, only simply explain the breathing part. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale, downward facing dog. 5 long and deep breaths here. And then with the next inhalation, then exhale. With the next inhalation, we rise. And then we exhale. Bring the hands down. So, you have actually many options to pick from if you want, how you transit through Sun Salutation type A. I actually highly recommend to practice different versions, even from different schools of yoga, because it's just really good for the body to get used to different movement patterns, and even it's good for you to practice it differently when you are just beginning your practice or when you're already warmed up and you have all the mobility and flexibility active in your body. I'm going to show you now 2 sequences which might look very similar. They are both in the type A, although there are slight modifications in both of them. So the first one goes like this. And then let's continue with the second round. So as you could notice, I did two versions of the type A. First one is more like a modified one for students who have less experience, and the second one is the one I added also already some personal preferences and personal challenges to my posture. Now, going to the type B and type C. In the type B, we basically do a slight modification. We replace one of these 10 postures, and then we add another posture on top of that in the sequence. So in the type B, we still start from Tadasana, the mountain pose, but instead of raising our hands and looking upwards to Urdhva Tadasana, we press backwards with our hips and raise our hands to Utkatasana, the chair pose. Or actually, this is a modification of chair pose because here we are arching our back and looking completely upwards. So that's the first posture. That's the only modification we have compared to the version A. From here with the next exhalation, we already go back to the trail of the type A. With an Uttanasana, arrive here with an exhalation. Next inhalation, we lift our chest. Then with an exhalation, come down to Chaturanga, or again on the floor. Inhale, upward facing dog, and exhale, downward facing dog. Now from here, instead of staying here for 5 breaths already, we add in one more new posture for each side of the body. So once we arrive here with an exhalation, we turn our left leg to 45 degrees, bring our right leg between the palms and come up to Warrior 1. We don't spend time in the Warrior 1. So basically, this whole movement from after arriving with an exhalation to downward facing dog, then we already start turning our left leg, start the inhalation. Inhale, 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 inhale. Then you have your lungs full here. And then with an exhalation, we already go and transit back to Chaturanga Dandasana. Inhale again, upward facing dog. And exhale, downward facing dog. Here comes the other side. You first start the inhalation process. Turn your right leg 45 degrees. Bring your left foot to the front. Raise your hands up, look up. Then while you start exhaling, you already bring down your hands on the mat. Then come down to Chaturanga. Inhale, upward facing dog. And exhale, downward facing dog. And then we stay here for 5 long and deep breaths, similarly to the type A. After we finish the 5th breath, so after the 5th exhalation here, the next inhalation, we continue with one leg, or with jumping both legs to the front. Then exhale down. Come up with an inhalation to Utkatasana. And exhale to mountain pose. So as you can see, the type B is also very similar to the type A, aside from the fact that adding the Warrior 1 and modifying the upward mountain pose to Utkatasana. Now when it comes to the type C, it's actually even more closer to the type A. Here we don't modify any of the existing 10 postures, we just simply add one more, which is called Anjaneyasana. So how does it look like? How does type C look like? We start from Tadasana, our mountain pose. Then inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Then from downward facing dog, with the next inhalation, we start bringing our right leg to the front, release your left knee on the ground, point the left toes, and raise your hands up, look up. That's the point where you should finish your inhalation. From here, with an exhalation, you're bringing down your hands on the floor, turn the back toes, then release down to chaturanga. Inhale to upward facing dog, exhale to downward facing dog. Then with the next inhalation, start bringing the left leg, inhale, 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 inhale. Then with an exhalation, we transit back to chaturanga. Inhale, upward facing dog, exhale, downward facing dog. If you want, you can actually keep the distance between the feet and the arms. It's a bit more challenging to stay in this version of downward facing dog. I personally prefer to take 1 foot distance out. And once you have your 5th breath completed here, you're bringing back one leg, the other, then exhale, fold forward, inhale, rise, and exhale. And that's it, basically. Here you have the type C completed. Again, how you modify the type A, all those modifications can be applied also in the type B and the type C. So this might look a bit difficult, and especially for beginners who never did Sun Salutations before, it might look intimidating, but once your body start getting used to the sequence, it actually gets way more easier, and you don't need to think about what's going to be the next posture. Your body can just do it automatically. In the beginning, I recommend to rather pay attention what postures are going to be and to the transitions, but it's not really mandatory to pay attention to your breathing. But once you get familiarized with how the sequence is being performed, I highly recommend to start paying attention also to your breathing, and that's actually where I do believe the magic happens, when you can completely synchronize your breathing and your movement, and then you can just do round and around and around again, and it's just a really, really wonderful feeling. So I really hope that you like this video, guys. Please let me know in the comment section if you have any observations, anything you like, anything you dislike. Any criticism is more than welcome. And again, highlighted in the beginning of this video, this is one way to perform Sun Salutations. By far, I'm not saying this is a good or a perfect way to do the Sun Salutations. Namaste.